Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. I've had a great time getting to know many of your leaders since last night, and I roll in the multi-site space, and so just want to say, totally loving all the pictures on the back wall and just what God is doing here in and through your church. It's really exciting. So a little bit about me. I actually grew up in the mountains of Montana. I'm going to kind of catch, by the way, girls, I'm going to catch all the guys up to stuff we talked about in more depth last night. But I grew up in the mountains of Montana in a tiny little church of like 100 people. We weren't very fancy, but we did really love God, and I really learned His Word. It was a great way to grow up. No one got paid in the church I grew up in, including the senior pastor. I didn't even know you could do things like this. I just thought when you became a Christian, you like gave all your extra money and all your extra time to the church, and that's like how the kingdom rolled, which is still kind of a good recipe if so I don't deny it anymore. I think we should do more of that. But when I went to college in Seattle, I was on scholarship from the VA. I was in nursing, and I got a job in a brand new VA hospital in South Florida in the psychiatric unit, which I thought was kind of weird, but crazy men trained to kill me. So night shift, 21 years old, psych unit. Turns out it was great training for ministry. So when people come to the altar now, if they need like prayer and intercession, if they need a shot of Haldol, I'm your person who can answer that. So I worked there for a couple years. I ended up working at a local university and became dean of students, got a master's degree in human resource development because I had extra time on my hands apparently. But all the while I was a part of a really great church in Florida that was growing really quickly. It was so different than my little homemade church in Montana where on Christmas Eve, I kid you not, it was open talent mic night. So anyone who wanted to sing a song or any fourth grader that wanted to play her recorder of We Three Kings, that happened. It was like 2.5 hours long. Not the best evangelistic strategy in the world. But in Florida, there were things like people sang on key. The message actually helped you with your life at the end. You didn't have to go home and like research what it meant. People seemed to like have their act together. It was kind of amazing. And so this church was growing really rapidly. In fact, it had doubled in size every year for 8 years. And we had just about hit the 3,000 mark, which I was like, this is like a church size of biblical proportions. Like, this is the book of Acts. I've never heard of a church this big. Surely we're not going to get any bigger. And they recruited me to come on staff and sort of help organize systems. So you all are part of a move of God. When God sort of steps in and like does things, you're just kind of like building the plane in the air, right? You're sort of hanging on. You're kind of like, we don't really know what we're doing. Please don't look behind the curtain. Like, we're just kind of going with it here. So I came on to kind of add some structure and process because I had this HR background, plus I have a background in musical theater, so we worked on weekend services, we worked on creating structure around ministries, and all that stuff. And I thought I was just going to be on staff for a couple years till I had a family and all these things. I ended up being in full-time ministry with them for 16 years. And by the time I left a few years ago, we were at 23,000 people on the weekend and 9 campuses. And I was overseeing our campus launches and our multi-site strategy and our School of Leadership that we built to supply that. And I was very tired after that run. And so I ended up transitioning. I started working with an organization called Leadership Network out of Dallas, if you know them. Ran all of their multi-site cohort groups where we brought in big multi-site churches, small ones starting out, all the way up to the big mega multis that you would know. And how to develop those strategies for sort of the next decade. And then I worked with our leadership development cohorts, and then worked with our XP mentoring groups. And in the process of that, I found myself speaking in places like this and working with groups of pastors, senior pastors, executive pastors, multi-site teams. And this really weird thing started happening. I would be like, I don't know, wrapping up the morning session, and a senior and executive pastor would come to me like, hey, Katie, can we have lunch with you? Because we have a few questions we want to pick your brain around. And I'd be like, sure. Now, I've been in a lot of ministry settings, and I've done a lot of these kinds of networking things, and I'm almost always the only girl in the room in any of those places. I never, ever, ever had anyone come up and want to have lunch with me. Like, never got asked that. Every once in a while, there was like a lone black guy. We would oftentimes end up having lunch together. I see you, right? We're like minorities unite at the cafeteria table. So, but So they came and asked me, and I actually had this happen 3 times in a period of 6 weeks, and they all asked the same question. And you know when something happens weird once, you're kind of like, that was interesting. When it happens twice, you're like, By the 3rd time, it's like, okay, God, what are you trying to point out to me? So the question they were asking me is, hey, we've got these young female leaders that we see a lot of potential in, and we're trying to figure out like what to do with them. We want to like put them into leadership. We want to help maximize what they're doing, or we have these women on our staff, but we're struggling a little bit because it's kind of like there's things we want them to do, and they're not quite sure they can do it. We're not quite sure if they can do it. So it was all around this female leadership topic. So these 3 guys are on this sort of thing. Was happening over here. And then over here in the multi-site space, we were trying to figure out strategies to actually launch campuses, multiply leaders, and you all know, when you start doing ministry in separate geographical locations, your ability to train leaders and develop cultural norms and have that go in a way that carries your culture with you and doesn't like get highwire, and then how do you actually measure that and bring it into alignment and anticipate challenges before they rise. Like, that's a whole nother world in the multi-site thing. So we were challenging all of this, and a few of the churches were really stuck on how to actually have enough leaders to fulfill the mission God had given them. So we kind of popped the HR hood on it, and as we started digging in there, what we found is in their leadership pipelines, because that's one of the things we were building, in their leadership pipelines that they are measuring, we would have plenty of leaders at the base, and it kind of goes up in like this funnel. But right about here, this mid-level, all the women would drop off. And so they had these roles that were open to women in their theology, even conservative churches, open to women, but the women would just drop off, and they didn't know why. They actually didn't even notice that it had happened. So as I'm having these conversations with these guys over here, I'm like, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. And they would be so excited to tell me these amazing efforts they've had. So we have this young woman, and she really has a heart for ministry, and we really think she's going to do great. So I brought her on as my secretary. That's awesome. Okay, what else have you tried? So they would tell me these ideas that they felt like were really great moves, and they actually were great moves. For what they had done in their church so far, these were big moves that they were doing, but they actually weren't great moves to actually help women grow in leadership. Being in a meeting where decisions are happening and taking notes in the back and making coffee is helpful to listen in, but it doesn't actually build leadership. She would have actually had a much better job if she would have gone and led a small group. Right? Because if you can't lead and disciple a small group, you can't really lead a ministry team. If you can't lead a ministry team, you can't help run a campus. If you can't help run a campus, you shouldn't be in that executive meeting anyway. So just hearing the conversation isn't the same as building leadership muscle that positions you to be able to lead in those spaces. In fact, one of the things that's the most challenging now is I'm coaching several executive level women who got in through the side door of administrative help, and they just don't have the chops to do the leadership required. They've never hired anybody. They've never fired anybody. They've never confronted a ministry that's off base. They don't know how to set goals. They know how to measure goals. They don't know how to set them and actually inspire a team to achieve them. You learn that down here with the basics that you then build up. So we started putting these things together, and I'm like, I actually think this is the same issue. And even though I've never really thought about this before, which I know is shocking because, I am a leader most of my life. I have been a female my whole life. You may have wondered. So those are optional things now. So I'd like to clarify that. You'd think this would have been a thing I would have been paying attention to this whole time. And I will tell you, I have not been paying attention to this. In fact, as I started doing a deep dive into the research, so we did a big research project where we did a deep dive into ministry research, we did a deep dive into academia, and we did a deep dive into marketplace and tried to pull all these things together. As I was doing the research, I realized how many biases I have against women. How many decisions I have made that have put women in that same spot as that guy who hired her to be an assistant. How many biases I have against myself. Things I've taken myself out of, things I've done to shoot my own leadership in the foot. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me. Honestly, when I was in ministry, I was just trying to get the job done. I'm like, I don't care about all that stuff. I just want to get my job done. I don't care what you call me. I care a little bit about what you pay me. But I really mostly care about just getting ministry happening. I'm not trying to build a career. I'm not trying to build a platform. I just want God to use me and use the gifts that he gave me. Because remember, I come from a place where no one cared about any of that stuff. So I'm just use me, God, and help me pay my bills. That's what I'm trying to do. So as we started putting all these things together, and I did this deep dive research research, we started finding that, as is the case with these 3 churches, and as was the case with these multi-sites that had these women kind of dropping off mid-level in management, we found that, because I'm sort of an HR nerd, that there really was no similarity in the types of churches that these things were affecting. They were different theological backgrounds. We had some really conservative complementarian churches that had women thriving in all levels of leadership, including the executive team. We had some really progressive egalitarian churches where there were almost no women leading at any formal level. They were from different parts of the country. So you know that if you're in the Bible Belt, you have certain biases that come culturally that really speak into churches. If you're in Seattle or in New York or even LA, you have a different egalitarian society that speaks into churches. It didn't have anything to do with where you were at in the area of the country. What we found didn't have anything to do around like the style of leadership. It didn't have anything to do around the type of mission you had, whether you were multi-site or not multi-site, whether you were doing Orange Conference or other things. Like, it didn't have anything to do with that. What we found is that the thing that made the biggest impact on whether churches were able to maximize the leadership gifts that God had given the women in their church, it all came down to the individual practices of the leaders and the types of cultures they were creating. It was all about the individual, personal leadership habits of each of the leaders and the types of cultures they were creating, which is why we could also find in some of those churches where half the church had no women serving in any of their ministries, and the other half of the church had women thriving in all sorts of marys. It came down to the individual leaders of those departments, and you really start to see it in multi-site, because you have one campus where women are serving all over the place, and you have another campus where almost no women are serving. It wasn't even the DNA of the church, it was the practices of the leader. So we did all that research. I interviewed a whole bunch of leaders, female leaders, executive pastors, senior pastors. We did a survey. I actually put it out on social media. I was hoping to get 100 responses for women to tell us about their story in church leadership. We got 1,200 responses, way more than I thought. I was like, we might be onto something. In the middle of this, I called or emailed my friend at Leadership Network who worked with some book publishers, and I'm like, do you think anyone else would be interested in what I'm uncovering in this research? And he's like, let me find out. So a week later, I'm on a Zoom call with people at HarperCollins, and they offer me a book contract right there. So if you've ever tried to publish a book, which I have tried for 30 years, that is not the way that normally goes down. And so they're like, can you have it written in 4 months? And I said, yes, I can. Also not what normally happens when you write a book. I realize now people take years to write a research-based book. So God was in it, and I was very thrilled to be a part of it. And mostly I was just trying to solve the problem. Like, we have church, I care and love deeply the mission of the local church. I am a product of an incredible local church that healed my family and raised me and sent me off into the world knowing who I was in Christ and that I was on mission to make the kingdom get bigger. I want more and more people to have that kind of experience. And we're missing it because we have these missions that God has given us and we can't seem to find our way there. So that's my agenda. I have no theological agenda. I have served in every single kind of church you could possibly imagine. I've served in super conservative churches. I've served in very egalitarian churches. I've served in a church that was this and moved to this. I've been in all the places, and I've been allowed to thrive and to lead and to enjoy my ministry in all of those spaces. But I am a leadership expert, and I know that we are leaving a lot of leadership unaccessed. And our mission is too important to do that. So what I want to talk to you today is based on some of the research in my first book, Developing Female Leaders, and what all of us can do. Men, women, worship ministry, student ministry, children's ministry, wherever you find yourself. These are the practices that we all need to incorporate. By the way, not just to make sure we're including other women into our church teams and into leadership, but also because women make up 61% of average church in America, which means they're actually the majority, right? They're the minority in leadership. They make up less than 15% of roles in formal leadership in churches. Now, formal leadership, we mean like a job with a title. So like you're the greeter coordinator, you're a Sunday school teacher, you're a small group leader. I'm not even talking about like the big guys that we could all have controversies about. I mean like any formal leadership role, less than 15%. If we as leaders don't start expanding our leadership practices to be good at including people who are different than us when they're the minority, by the way, also the women who are in our classes that we've known for decades, I'm not married to them, but some of you are married to them. Like, we know these women, right? These are women that we know and trust and love you as leaders and want to be in your church. If we can't figure out a way to incorporate into our leadership styles and practices the majority of the church, we are never going to get good at actually reaching across racial divides and including actual minorities into our church leadership spaces. And that is the church of the future. The church of the future is not going to be just one color and just one gender and just one age. If we're going to reach a culture that has diversity as a top priority and is living it 6 days of the week, we've got to be able to also have that one day a week when we all come to church, right? Okay, so let me talk to you about, I think I've got 3 keys. I'm old now, so I need glasses to read any of my notes. Let's see. I got 4 keys. 4 keys for you. Oh, shoot. I know it's going to work. We practice this. Oh, excellent. Okay. All right. Key number 1, clearly define your theology. Clearly define your theology. I mentioned earlier that when we did all of our research, we found that theology, which I assumed was actually going to be the biggest issue around this topic, was actually not really an issue at all. It can sometimes feel like in our sort of Christian culture, especially in America, that we're either sort of like for women or against women. And whichever theological side you're on kind of tells me everything I need to know. But again, when it came down to it, that really had very little to do with it. What is the difference maker is whether you know what your theology is and you're clearly articulating it. And I would say this is not just the senior pastor's job, although we do need senior pastors to clearly articulate theology. That's one of their jobs. But it's you as a leader. You need to know what your church believes and be able to actually implement that. The problem we found is when someone believed this, but the practices on their team were way over here. So I believe that women have the right to do blah, 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 but what we're actually doing in practice is all this over here. So here's the way to think about it. Okay, wherever your theological line is, whether you're way up here or way down here, I don't care, but knowing where your theological line is, most female leaders, especially the kind of women you would invite into leadership into your church, we know that this is an issue. We know it's a hot topic issue. We know it's emotionally charged. We know there's a lot of disagreement about it. If you've been around church space at all, you know that this is a thing. At least women do. We are taught this very early. So godly women, mature women, women who have been around for a long time, women who know their Bible, women who understand ministry, these are the women you want to recruit into leadership. By the way, I am not an advocate that every woman should be in leadership. Just like I'm not an advocate that every man should be in leadership. There are a lot of people who you should never give leadership to. So don't hear that from me. But the right kinds of leaders, the kind of women you would want to hand people and ministry over to, know that this is an issue. And so for women, we also know that this is one of those lines that if we cross it, it's really hard to come back from, right? If we overstep, if we reach too far, if we long for something that's not been given to us, in our culture, that is almost the unforgivable sin for a female leader. And so because we know that, we back way up from the line. So most women, when things are not clear of where your line is, they're guessing it's down here somewhere. We will always assume the line is lower than it probably is. So if your line is at a 6, most women are going to assume it's probably around a 4 because that's probably what your culture is living out. We tend to, as you go down through the organization and to the front line where you're like on the usher team, right? There's like a pretty strong culture that says women can't, pick up money at the end of the row, right? And we feel it. We know it. Now, you may not think that's true, but there's an usher that's helping us know that that is not true. So we're going to assume it's lower because that's what we see. It's what we see on the platform. It's what we see on your website. We're going to assume it's lower than it probably is. And so where women are going to lead is like way down at a 1 or a 2. So you're here. They think it's here. They're leading way down here. And this gap, that gap between where your line and where you welcome women to lead and where they're actually leading, that's the missing piece. That's the piece that's keeping all these churches from launching campuses and reaching the mission that God has given them, the missing piece. So you don't need to change your theology, but you do need to be able to articulate it so that you can spell out for women and the men that you have in your church what are all the roles that women can actually fill. So I have a cheat sheet on my website that if you have questions about this or want to kind of understand the theologies, in the book I go through the different kinds of theologies, try to give some language to it, especially if this is a new topic for you, or you're running into resistance from people. If you have a lot of growth from other churches, they'll bring a lot of their own theologies and a lot of their own phrases and a lot of their own assumptions into your campus. You have to be able to articulate this because we need you to explain it. We are not interested in stepping over the line, but if you don't tell me where the line is, I can't lead up to it. I think part of it is like the leftover piece where like, if sin is here, I want to live way back here, right? Which I do with sin. But when it comes to my leadership, I want to live right up to here. I want to live right up to here. I want to do everything I possibly can do in the kingdom to make heaven come to earth. So clearly define your theology. I make an argument in the book that I don't think it's this binary choice. I'm complementarian, I'm egalitarian, I'm for women, I'm against women. I don't think that's the right conversation. I don't even think that's reality. I make an argument that there's actually a spectrum of positions on this, from strong complementarian to moderate to mild egalitarian to moderate to strong. And on the way extremes, you got patriarchy and you got matriarchy. I'm not a fan of either of those, by the way. That's the one theological statement you'll hear from me. Don't do those. But anywhere in the spectrum, there's a lot of movement. And the challenge, again, is not where you are. The challenge is I am here, but my culture is operating like I'm way over here, or vice versa. That's where we tend to lose a lot of sideways energy for lots of women, but also for a lot of men. So that's the first key, is to clearly define your theology. A couple things about that is once you have that clearly established, is to make sure that the volume on the yeses is louder than the volume on the nos. You've been around church for a little while, like I have. I grew up in a very conservative church, again, which I loved, but we were really loud about teaching the things women were not allowed to do, like really loud. And I heard that loud and clear my entire growing up. No pastor, no elder, no authority figures. I'm like, I'm totally good at that. The problem is what happens is when you hear that one no message, year after year after year and decade after decade after decade, most women start to take in that actually it's not that I have spiritual headship. It's not that our senior pastor and elders have to be men. It's that actually I should be submitting to all men. Now, we should not be submitting to all men. I have a lot of people who come into the church that I should be not submitting to. We have unbelievers coming to church. I know if I am in Christ, I have spiritual authority over an unbeliever. I have seen women lead a greeter huddle before service and let a brand new Christian pray because he's a man, and she doesn't feel like she can pray out loud in front of a man, right? I don't know any pastor who actually thinks that's a good idea. But a lot of women, a lot of smart, godly women do those kind of moves all the time because what they've been hearing the whole time is the no. We need to turn the volume up on the yeses. Because you may have reserved some roles that are only for men. That's great. There are 1,000 roles that women can fill under that. We need to talk about those things and articulate it and recruit women to it. That's the thing that should have the highest volume. I also just want to point out that I looked it up, and that is how you spell the word yeses. In case any of the grammar police are out there, I verified it twice, again this morning, because it just didn't look right. Okay. Second thing, when you're clearly defining your theology, is to make sure you are affirming leadership, and the earlier, the better. When I sent out the survey, one of the interesting things from all these women, any women who had sort of broken through the glass ceiling at church, well, in church world, we call it the stained glass ceiling, any of the women who had sort of broken through and had levels of leadership above a coordinator, all had experienced some authority figure in their life tell them that they were a leader before the age of 19. 19. And I have to tell you, less than 10% of them were pastors. It was a teacher, it was a boss, it was a sports coach. Almost none of them had their pastor tell them that they had leadership in them. But it changed the trajectory of how they viewed themselves in those critical identity years. So guys, especially I'm talking to you, when you have spiritual authority and you affirm leadership in women, you bring life and energy and vision to them that they have probably never heard. It's sometimes hard for guys to realize this because you have had leadership affirmed in you your whole life. I remember my 5-year-old going to church and the senior pastor's up there and like, look at you, buddy. You're going to be such a great leader one day. You're going to lead your family. You're going to lead a business. I'm like, he's 5. He's like wearing a Superman cape. Like, there's no actual leadership we're seeing in this kid right now. But we knew he was going to be a leader, and so we affirmed it. So we need to do the same thing for women. I'm not saying 5-year-olds, but I'm saying when you see leadership, please use the right word. When you see gifts of teaching, when you see any of the gifts, 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, when you say it, it sears into their soul. They take it as a word from God. You speak on behalf of the Lord over your people. That's what a pastor does. Please do it more often. Please use the right biblical words so that when I look in Scripture in my little devotionals when I'm in college, I see myself in the Bible. I don't have these words over here like, it's so great to have you up there sharing. Sharing is not in the Bible anywhere. I shared a lot and thought I was not really doing Bible stuff, right? So tell me I'm a teacher. Tell me I'm doing something. Tell me I'm doing something where I can see myself in the Bible. You keep telling me to read it. I want to see myself in Scriptures. Use the right biblical words and do it often and do it young. I just started telling every kid that they're a leader. I'm like, I might be wrong. And because if you can't lead, no one will give you a leadership role. But if you are, right, some leaders look kind of crazy at 12, right? But if you are, oh man, I want to stoke that seed in there. I want to be able to really, I want you to do everything you're supposed to do in the kingdom. So my theory is I think girls right now are going to be fine. Teenage girls right now, they're going to be fine. They've got Gen X moms who are like, we're the ones doing stuff like this. They're going to be fine. It's teenage boys right now who need to hear it. They're the ones we're going to lose next. So I'm actually working on a big research project about them because I'm like, my heart is actually for the people getting left out of working in the kingdom. Like that, I care about people who are left out of the kingdom too, but I'm like, there are Christians who are not doing what they should be doing in the kingdom. And it's because we're not stewarding it correctly. So, all right, I digress. Okay, so that's the first key. Key number 1, clearly define your theology. Key number 2, reach beyond the sticky floor. Reach beyond the sticky floor. So the sticky floor is I told you about the glass ceiling. You've heard of that, kind of these invisible barriers and structures, stained glass ceiling in the church where women can't really break through into leadership that they're welcome to be a part of. And we have to look at those kinds of systems. But the sticky floor is actually on the opposite side. It's the conversations and dialogues women have with themselves that keep their feet stuck to the leadership floor and prevents them from going for leadership opportunities or taking a promotion or volunteering to do something that they've never done before. I meet a lot of women who turn down promotions. I've never met one guy who's turned down a promotion before. And women do this to themselves all the time. So one of my favorite research studies in the book talks about how men and women look at leadership opportunities differently. So when a guy looks at a job description and he reads through it and feels confident of about 60% of what's on the job description, he applies for the job, he kind of figures he'll probably get it, and he feels good about being able to go in and kind of crush this job. When a woman looks at a job description, she has a totally different experience. She has to feel confident of 100% of what's on that job description from the first day, or she won't even apply for the job. Think about that. She won't even apply. She won't put her name in the hat. She won't even allow herself to be considered. Now think about how we work in church leadership spaces and how you look for potential leaders. You're not looking for the person hanging out in the back, shy, waiting for someone to discover them. You're looking for the person who's putting their hand up. I'm like putting the name in that. I mean, I've got them. I'm like getting resumes from people. They're like, I'll do any job. I'll be a custodian just so I can be a part of what God's doing there. I'm like, well, we have a custodian job open, but you haven't applied for that one. You really want the pastor job, whatever. So we're looking for people who are hungry to be a part of things. They show up early. They're like showing up and wanting to be mentored by you. They're hungry to grow. They're hungry to be a part. They want to be involved in something. That's the sticky floor talking. I can guarantee you in each of your churches, you have women who are sitting in the chairs who have amazing experience, who know and love God, who could steward and shepherd and minister like crazy, but they aren't applying for your openings. They're not volunteering for your leadership roles. They're not coming to you and saying, here's my resume. Is there anything here that you could use at our church that I can contribute in this way? So we have to think about and reach beyond the sticky floor so that we actually incorporate and invite those women into leadership. So the first step is that we have to recruit differently. You have to recruit differently, whether it's for a volunteer role, whether it's for a part-time job, a temporary job. Maybe you've got a project like a building project or a new initiative that you're doing or running a capital campaign of some kind. You can invite people into this, but we have to do it differently. So look for the women who are leading. You know who they are. Leaders can't help but kind of show up, right? They're the ones put together, by the way. They're not the ones always running 10 minutes late and they've got dribble on them. Go for the leader, the people you want all together. I'm sorry, if you've got a newborn, you get a total 3-year pass. So just letting you know that. You're looking for the people who can deliver on some of the projects that you want. You're looking for people that other people are following. You're looking for people who hold their emotions in and can control a situation and detour people. You're looking for people who are coming and talking to you and saying hey, I got a question. So you said this, but then this is also happening. Help me understand how this, that's how leaders work, right? They want to know, they want to understand because they're with you. And they can't be fully with you if they don't understand. So don't ever look at a woman questioning what you're doing as bucking your authority. She's trying to understand because she wants to be with you. So who are those people? And then talk to them about the opportunities that you have for them. Go to them and say, hey, here's the job description. And listen, I know you've been a greeter for 4 years, and I know you organize everything, and I know you had a big barbecue at your house this summer. So this greeter coordinator role, you're already doing most of this job. We're just not calling you that title yet. And these 2 or 3 other things that you've never done before, we'll train you, or we'll show you how to do it. You can shadow someone. We don't expect you to be good at this job for at least a year. Or if you're coming on staff, we don't expect anything big from you for at least 6 months. We just want you to get to know people. We want you to understand the culture of being on staff. We want you to do your job, but you don't have to impress us. You don't need to be perfect from the first day. It's okay to not know what you're doing. Because when women have the opportunity to serve at church, there's a few things happening that you might not be aware of. Again, these are mature women that you want to pull into leadership roles. First of all, they've probably sensed that God has something big for their life, like maybe a call into ministry. But if they've grown up in a space where they didn't see any women doing that, that's a calling you have to kind of set to the side. Or you're I think I'll be a nurse and figure out a way to do it this way. Or maybe I'll be a teacher, or maybe I'll marry a pastor, and that'll be the way this thing is gonna flesh out. So when you come to them and you're hey, I see leadership in you, and I think you could do this, you're gonna be tapping into something that's been dormant and probably a little sad for a little while. That is an amazing experience. Even if you don't give her the job, you're gonna be saying, I see this in you, right? That matters to everybody. It especially matters to the women in your congregations. And then secondly, you can take the pressure off to be this perfect person, right? You don't have to do everything great. It doesn't have to be perfect from the beginning. You're not gonna disappoint me. You're not gonna embarrass your family. And you're not gonna disappoint God, because that's what we feel, right? This feels like the only chance I'm ever gonna get to do something for God. So I've got a lot of pressure on myself. Anyone realize that high capacity female leaders put a lot of pressure on themselves? Yeah. So you have the ability to spiritually relieve that pressure valve and just make it a normal human job. I know it seems silly, but you have to go you get to be a normal human and come into this job and make some mistakes and learn the ropes. And when you do, I'll let you know. If you don't hear from me, this is a very important initial conversation, by the way, leaders, when you hire a woman or put them into a new role of any kind, is to say, hey, just so you know, if something goes wrong, I will tell you. I will tell you. If you don't hear from me, I am really great with what you're doing. And the reason is because that sticky floor, the longer you go without hearing from your leader, the more you start to think you're doing so many things wrong and he's scared to tell you, right? And so the longer you go without sort of a shot in the arm or a review or something that tells me I got 5 gold stars, the more I'm worried that I'm actually about to be fired. I know that seems ridiculous, guys, but that's how we think. So when you have a conversation and hire someone, let them know about your leadership style. If you're someone who gets together with someone every week and lets them know how great they are, awesome, then do that. But if you're like most leaders, which are things get busy and you don't always get to the people who are performing well, when you have a high capacity woman who is performing well, she does not know that. You need to tell her what to expect from your style of leadership so she can remind herself. Okay, so recruit differently. Secondly, give candid feedback. Give candid feedback. In the research, generally speaking in our culture, when we give feedback to guys who have done something, we give what's called constructive feedback. We're hey, great job on announcements this weekend. The next time you do this, would you please, let's take it down from 11 minutes to 3. And no need to bring your own scripture. We have a sermon coming up. No need to have an altar call. You're just the 3 announcements. That's all we're looking for from you. So very constructive feedback. Hope that there's going to be more times. When we give feedback to women, we tend to give what's called vague praise. So it's like, great job. Like, it's so good to have a girl up on stage. Yeah, your hair is awesome. Love those curls. Thank you. So we give vague praise. We're like, way to go, excellent, high five, or whatever's appropriate. Like all that stuff, which feels good. Please don't not tell me I did a good job at the end of today. Don't. But when you lead someone, you need to give them candid feedback. Leaders thrive on growth, and growth happens through feedback. If you don't give constructive feedback, you aren't giving growth. And when you're a leader and you're not growing, you're wondering what you're doing there, right? Like, do they not see any more potential in me that they can't even give me a suggestion? Is this as good as I'm ever gonna get? Because we get up and we share something in staff meeting, or we give announcements, or we lead a meeting. We know it's not great. Remember, we're holding ourselves to this. We know it's not perfect. And so if you give me feedback and you're like, hey, next time you do it, try and do this in the agenda. Next time you do it, try to practice before you get up on stage and give that. Next time you do it, I want you to keep this in mind, or slow down. And that phrase, next time you do it, is paramount. Because most women assume they've got one shot, and if they blow it, they're out. That is not a learning growth mindset, and that's not the kind of tone you want to set, and that's not even what you believe, but we will think that. So you say, next time you do it, and I'm like, there's a next time? I didn't just disqualify myself? Excellent. The next time you do it, try these things, and then go back again. The next time you do it, try these things. And if you're always giving me feedback, what I'm doing well that I should keep, what I'm not doing is great that I should change, I know that you care about me, and I know that you see potential in me. And I will thrive where someone sees potential in me, because I know I have more to offer, and you are the person who can help me offer it, right? Okay, so recruit differently, give candid, constructive feedback. All right, key number 3, leverage your authority. Leverage your authority. Leaders, you have authority that the people you lead do not have. You see things that the people you lead cannot see. You know things that the people you lead cannot know. You are given authority. This is the Abrahamic covenantal blessing, right? You are blessed to be a blessing. You have authority to be able to extend it to the people. We don't have authority, like Jesus said, to lord it over people, right? We do it differently. We have authority to leverage on behalf of the people. We're servant leaders. So when it comes to female leaders, we leverage our authority in very specific ways. I have a whole list of suggestions in the book, but a couple I want to point out here is how you introduce women. You can leverage the authority of your role on the team when you introduce women. So most women, the research says, most men when they're introduced are introduced on their accomplishments. So here's Pastor Joe, he's coming to speak to us today, and he's the pastor of this thing, and he's done this stuff, and he went to seminary here, and I know him from blah, blah, blah. All these things, all these accomplishments, so that when he gets up to speak, everyone's like, this guy has authority. He knows what he's talking about. And we appreciate and respect him because of all these things. When a woman gets up to speak, she generally gets introduced based on her relationships and her personality. So we can say, here's Katie, and she's a really fun girl. She's got a great smile and a lot of energy. I met her online, or I met her at a conference, or she's my sister's best friend, and she's married, and she's got a kid, and she blah, blah, blah. She's all of these things, my relationships, my personality. You're really gonna enjoy hearing from her. Two very different experiences. You could also say, here's Katie Cole. She's been on full-time ministry staff for over 20 years. She owns her own business. She's got a master's degree. She's blah, 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 right? It gives very different perspectives when you go to listen to what they have to say. So use your authority and introduce women so that they don't have to spend the first 5 minutes helping people know they should be listened to. You can do that for them, and they don't have to talk about themselves. So introducing, and this happens in like big arenas. It also happens when you're leveraging authority and introducing them one-on-one to someone in your campus. You're introducing a volunteer to them. You're connecting them with a high-end donor. You're introducing them to a key parent from student ministries. Anytime you're making an introduction, just make sure you're being equitable and introducing people on their accomplishments and who they actually are. Now, in the church world, we leverage off of relationships all the time. So I'm not saying you not say, hey, we went to college together, or this is my wife's best friend. You can say all those things, but say it second, right? Lead with accomplishments and then allow the personal relationships to come in secondary. Second, 3 things every leader needs. 3 things every leader needs. A mentor, mentors, sponsors, and coaches. And for most guys, you get all three of these baked in to your staff experience, to your growing up experience, to your church experience. But for women, we get almost none of these baked in. And so it's important as leaders that we work hard to try and offer these three things. Now, you may not be all three things to the people on your team, but you can help them have all three of these. So, a mentor. Now, this is not spiritual mentorship, right? All that kind of stuff. This is leadership mentoring. This is how you mentor someone to grow in the skills of leadership. So, a mentor talks with you about leadership. So you probably mentor a lot of your people in ministry leadership because you're their boss and you're their leader. And so this would be the conversations you have with people before they get up and do something. You watch them do it. You talk to them about it afterwards. You decompress. You're like, how did that feel? What did you think? What was going through your mind? Mentors talk with each other. And we all need that. That's kind of easy to get as supervisor roles. Although I will say that the research would say most male supervisors who oversee female leaders tend to go very light on leadership mentoring. They tend to not process things as much. They don't challenge them as much. They don't call them up. Those things about like, next time you do this, that constructive feedback, please don't give up leadership mentoring to your women leaders. They can't get it anywhere else. You guys, who's going to mentor them in leadership? If they're in this room, they're at the top of the leadership thing in your church, right? If you don't mentor them, no one else can. You're the one who watches their performance, so you have to debrief it with them. Sponsors are a totally different role. You also have the opportunity to do this. Sponsors don't talk with you. Sponsors talk about you. So when you're in a meeting with people that you work with or work for, there are going to be things that come up, new initiatives, new ideas. You're going to launch campuses. You've got development money you want to invest in people. Sponsor and talk about the women on your team. The women that you know have capacity that aren't going to ever sit in that room for a while, that aren't able to represent themselves in those ideas, and start throwing out names. Look across this room and be like, where do I see great leadership potential that I recognize? And how can I be advocates and champions and sponsor those women to do those opportunities? When I talked earlier about women being assistants versus coming up through the pipeline, this is how you give women more leadership opportunities, is we have a new campus launch. Well, that's great. Why don't we look around and see who are the women I can sponsor to be on that team? Even if they're not selected, simply putting their name in the hat to be considered opens up future doors of opportunity for them. Maybe you have a project that your team is working on that's kind of a side thing, but you need to put a couple people there. Rather than you guys just doing it yourselves, why don't you create a task force and invite some women into that role and test them out and give them some experience and give them an extra project that exposes them to more people, that increases their ability to understand how things work, that allow them to grow in their leadership. So sponsor them in ways by offering their name, and also create sponsorship opportunities that you have influence over to give them more chances to practice their leadership. And then the last one is coaches. This is actually the one that I recommend is best done with same gender, because there are some things, probably about 15% of leadership when it comes, especially in ministry leadership, is uniquely based on gender. Like I have wonderful guy, but leadership mentors and sponsors in my life that have helped me do a lot of things. They can't help me pack for a business trip with a bunch of guys. Like, there's a fine art to that, I'm just telling you. Getting that all in one bag that doesn't get checked, like that takes some practice. How do I manage my kids in different seasons of their life as a mom? It's different in our culture than it is for a dad. How do I speak to my boss in a way that I don't let my emotions overflow me? Right? It's different for women than it is for, I always say men have just as many emotions, but they have to channel them differently than women. We're both figuring it out, but we do it differently. I can talk to you about that short skirt you wore on stage. I know none of you guys want to have that conversation. So coaches matter. Think about what a coach does. A coach talks at you. A mentor talks with you. A sponsor talks about you. A coach talks at you. Think of like an elite athlete running around a track, getting ready for the Olympics. The coach is yelling at them. The coach is telling them what to do differently. The coach sees and believes in them more. So coaches matter, and it matters that you have the most affinity possible because you're speaking the same language and you know what to do. There are not a lot of qualified female seasoned coaches out there. So this is where you probably have to make some investment on behalf of your women leaders, because your wife, as great as she is, if she's not led in a church, is probably not going to be it. The women's ministry, awesome Bible study leader, as awesome as she is and as much as she knows God's word, isn't going to be able to help your leader know, how do I fire a volunteer? How do I hire someone when she's my best friend? Do I do that? These are things you have to get coaching on to know how to navigate the nuances of relationship. And so I just encourage people to put it in their budget because your world has it baked in. Most guys go to their staff meeting and there are mentors, sponsors, and coaches in that entire room. They could go to lunch and have all three of those in a heartbeat. Women go in and they ask for mentoring, please give it to them. They're hoping someone sponsors them, and there are no people to coach them. So we have to resource them differently, at least for the next decade or so. I know it's going to get better. I know it's going to get different. I've never been more hopeful and excited for how women are going to be able to be used in the kingdom than I am right now. But we're not there yet. So resourcing it and making sure all of your people have all that they need. Okay, last one. Key number 4, and then we'll do some Q&A. Always take 2. Always take 2. So in the leadership space, you guys probably all know this, there's this principle that you always take someone with you. So this is how we train up future ministers. So if you're going to the hospital and you're going to meet with a family that's had a really tragic car accident, you take the intern with you or take a young staff person with you, and you talk about it on your way there. You get to minister and they watch you, and then you debrief it on the way home. It's the way we develop leaders. Next time you go and you let them say the prayer and you kind of work them up. So that is a huge principle. We all need to keep doing that. The challenge is when we do that and we have boundaries around us, around gender, which I fully agree with, by the way, it limits who we can take with us. And when most of the leadership roles are by men, they're taking other men, and women never get to learn how to do these ministry opportunities. And so my rule is, let's just shift it a little bit. Instead of only taking one person with you, always take 2. Take 2 guys, take 2 girls, take a guy and a girl. A few things happen when you do that. First of all, you make it accessible for everyone on your team to be able to come with you. If you have a leadership practice, make sure that you're giving it to every single person on your team. If you develop and mentor people by taking them out to lunch, that's great. Take everybody out to lunch. If you can't take everybody out to lunch, don't take anybody out to lunch. Be consistent. Don't treat half your team differently than the other half. So when you take 2 with you, you automatically make it possible for a whole bunch of people to access your leadership expertise and learn from you that weren't able to do it a while ago. The second thing happens, which as an HR person I just want to tell you is the most strategic thing, is not only do you double your leadership development investment, right? You have doubled your ROI on your time in that experience. But one of the things that keeps people employed longer, that increases our retention, is when people have best friends at work. Do you know that's the number one indicator of someone staying in their job, is that I feel like I have a best friend at work? Most people don't get that because we put them in Paul-Timothy relationships almost exclusively for development. We create very few Barnabas relationships. And so when you take 2 people with you, you put them together, they experience something together, you know they're going to talk about you when you're gone. That's fine. You want that. They're going to talk about it. They're going to debrief it. This is the guy they're going to call. When they're stuck on something, they're going to read a book together. They're going to challenge things together. These are, you all probably have these Barnabases. They're still the same person you reach out to, and you're like, okay, so this went down in a meeting. What do you think about this, right? We want to form that with as many people as possible. And so you expand your leadership, you double your ROI, and you increase retention by this one simple move. It's brilliant. Genius. Okay. A couple things to think. First, I mentioned I am a big fan of the Billy Graham rules. I am a product of being able to grow up in 25 years of ministry and not had anything really inappropriate happen. I've had some really awkward, funny moments, but nothing super inappropriate that we had to, do anything big formal about. But the last 2 churches I've walked through a moral failure never broke any of the Billy Graham rules. It was all done through made-up emails and sexting. And so we do not live in 1948 anymore when the Billy Graham rules were created. And so these gender-specific roles, as if we have protection when some guy, senior pastor, takes the new young seminary grad to a conference and they fly together and eat together and share a room together and go to the conference together and fly home. In our LGBTQ world, that is no longer above reproach. You are not safe in that environment. So we have to rethink as a collective church how to have professional guidelines that protect us in today's day and age. And at the same time, don't eliminate half your leadership pool because they can't qualify to ride in a car together with you. So that's why this concept of always taking 2 with you really, really, really matters. It should impact our practices, it should impact and double our leadership efforts, and it's going to impact our budget. But that is the cost of developing leaders. We have to be willing to pay the price and to do it in a way that protects us, protects our families, protects our own purity and testimony, protects our church, and keeps our testimony to a community going strong. We actually need I actually think our lost community around us has more aptitude for immorality than it does for gender discrimination. Now, as the Church of Jesus, we need both, but we're fooling ourselves if we think the Billy Graham rule is keeping us shiny, squeaky clean. It is not doing that. We need to make sure we're catching up and we're also holding fast to the things we believe in. All right, second one. Please, please, please remember, the person with the authority sets the boundary. The person with the authority sets the boundary. This is why we've seen such a shock wave of men in the Me Too and the Church Too movement, aghast at all the accusations coming at them. Because they forgot, when you have authority and power over someone else, it's never a mutual relationship. It isn't. When you have power like that, it's never equal. It's never consensual, because there's always power. So the best example I can give to this is I have a son, Ethan. He's 19. And we see this a lot in parent-child dynamics. Now, I'm from Florida. I don't know if you have this in Nebraska, but there's a lot of moms who want to become one of their teenagers, especially if they have teenage daughters. And they want to be equal with them and their daughter's best friend, right? And they kind of dress like them and they talk like them and they want to go everywhere with them. And you're like, there's something really wrong with that. Right? We all know there's something really wrong with that because parents are supposed to have authority over their kids. And when parents get older and kids get older, when kids age, their parents' words still have more impact than anybody else because they will always have authority. Even when they're both adults, even when the child is caring for an elderly parent, when a parent says, "I love you, I am proud of you," at 95 on their deathbed, it means more than any other person to this kid because parents will always, always, always have authority. You as leaders, you have authority. So whoever you're leading, whatever the dynamic, when you have the authority, you set the boundaries. It's not about what makes other people feel comfortable. It's about what you have authority to do. That's why it's so critical for us as leaders that we don't make our authority so tight and close-knit that we exclude people from being developed. We set the authority, but when it comes to interpersonal relationships, we set the boundaries and we hold the line. Got it? So it becomes really important as we bring younger leaders onto teams, as you have, I don't know if you've started having high school interns in the summer and things like that. Their boundary issues are non-existent, their boundaries are non-existent, and that creates issues. So social media, how close I sit to someone next on the couch, all of those things really matter. So it's not about helping people feel comfortable on the team. It's about knowing our boundaries and setting updated practices that we can all live with that include everybody but protect everybody and actually use the authority that God gave us to protect the flock. That's the point of it. Okay. All right, so just in wrap up, this is my website. I do send out a monthly newsletter with this kind of research and information or other books that I think are being written well on the subject. And if you are a female, we have a group called Ministry Chick. It's a Facebook group of about 3,500 church staff women where we try to help network and create some Barnabas relationships. So there's a lot of great information out there about leadership, about ministry, about home life balance, all the things that you're probably asking. You're welcome to do that, and you can follow me on social media. Just in closing, for me, I know I mentioned this to the gals a little bit last night, but one of the areas of scripture that's very motivating for me about this topic is John chapter 17. When Jesus is at the end of his life, he's about to be taken away by the Roman soldiers, and he is praying out loud, right? So the prayers are documented. Jesus rarely prayed out loud in front of his disciples. He often went by himself alone to pray, but this time he chooses to pray out loud, and he prays for them, and he prays for the world, and then he prays for the disciples yet to come, which is us. He looks into the future and he sees us and he has a single prayer. And I'm a church strategist. I would have prayed for a lot of things. I would have prayed for more faith. I would have prayed for more resources. I would have prayed for more vision, although we have a lot of vision. I would have prayed for more evangelists. I would have prayed for a lot of things, but Jesus prays for unity. He prays that we would be one like he and the Father are one. And I really believe that these are the things that Jesus was praying for, that our lost world is looking for someone who's together, who's doing ministry together, who's leading together, who honors God and loves one another and lives out fellowship the way God designed. And we do it in a way that's diverse, and we do it in a way that's rich and complicated and messy and relational, and we do it in a way that honors God, and we lean into it. Because John 17 says, if we do that, that is actually how people will see that God loves them. That we're the one, that is a supernatural act for us to all be able to lead together in unity. It requires a supernatural act. That is the thing that will stand out. I know everyone's talking about unity out there. We actually have the power to do it. We're the only ones who have it. And I get very concerned when I walk into a Target store or a Home Goods and I see t-shirts and journals and mugs that all say the future is female. The future is not female. We know it from John chapter 17. It is not female. It is not male. It is not only one race. It is not rich or poor or just middle class. It is not single or married. The future is together. It's not separate. Every time we separate ourselves, we're falling into the world's trap. Jesus wants us to be united because the togetherness is the thing that will stand out from the world. Amen? Amen. Okay, thank you.